Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Friday. It's a little sparse here in the classroom. There should be more bodies than there are. Kind of curious where people are, but we will press on regardless, right? What are you guys doing this weekend?
No plan.
No plan?
Maybe no.
Maybe no? Is it secret and illegal? You can't tell me. You can't tell me, or you'd make me an accessory to your crime.
Not sure. How about you?
Yeah, I think it'll be pretty quiet. There's a list of things around the house that I need to do that I've been like putting off, and so I should probably try to do them. We have a light switch in the front, like the front door area. It's the light, and it's got two switches. So it's got a switch to turn it on and off by the door, and then there's one further down by the stairs. And so you can turn the light on or off from either switch, or at least you're supposed to be. But sometimes it works that way, and then sometimes if the switches are in the wrong order, you can't seem to turn them on or off anymore. And so you've got to have like the switches in the right order, and then you can kind of turn it on and off. But then sometimes it doesn't work at all. And so I don't know if there's a loose wire, or I don't know what's going on, but I'm gonna try to sort that out on the weekend, because it's half the time when you flick the switch, nothing happens. And then you got to go over to the other switch and flick it, and then nothing happens. Then you go back to the first one, and then it turns on. So something weird is going on, but I don't know what it is. I replaced those switches a few months ago, and at first it didn't work at all. And then I kind of played with the wires and switched them around, and then I thought I got it correct, but now it seems to be acting weird again. So I've got to go back to it. Electricity. It's complicated. All right. Okay, let's jump back into where we were yesterday. We did a kind of a big deal. It was kind of a big deal on this article about Ukraine, and I was asking you all kinds of difficult questions. There were some complaints that it was too real. There was too much heavy reality. But I did want to say that we need to be able to do that, right? We need to be able to like read, an opinion piece or a piece with an argument. We need to be able to figure out what that person is trying to convince us of, and we need to be able to think about it, right? And again, whether you agree with what these authors are saying or not, it doesn't matter so much to me, but it does matter that we can think about what they're arguing, right? And we can say, we can look at the argument, we can see if it's a logical and a sound argument, and we can, maybe take issue with it, right? And we can say, no, I disagree because of this point here, right? Or so it took us a little while, but I was happy with where we got to. I think we did a good job with it. That was good. I thought that was good. So obviously that was the idea of whether we should oppose Russia or not, right? Whether we should do something about their aggression toward Ukraine. And we identified all of these premises here, or you identified all of these premises. Again, I kind of color-coded them because I think some of them kind of fit together with each other. And so I did that. But yeah, we did a good job. We talked a little bit about whether we agreed or disagreed. And I think we kind of agreed that it was a good comparison with Hitler and Europe in the late 1930s, right? We agreed that we have a similar situation, even though, Putin and Hitler are not really the same, right? They're both kind of authoritarians, but, Putin isn't a fascist, and they're not the same thing, right? But they are posing the same kind of challenge, right? They are trying to assert their will over other countries, right? And it seems to be a challenge to Western countries of, are we going to take issue with this? Are we going to oppose them, or are we going to just let it happen, right? And it's a difficult question, right? It's a difficult question. We do know, of course, that Britain and France decided to just let it happen for the first part of Hitler's conquest anyway, but we'll get to that. Yesterday we talked a little bit about Nazi propaganda, right? And propaganda was kind of information that was created by the government or spread by the government, usually to try and get the people to feel a certain way about something, okay? And again, it can be positive or negative. We'll take probably next week we'll look at some negative examples of propaganda. But of course, Hitler says it very clearly in his book. He says it's, to make the people believe what you want them to believe, right? If you can teach them what to believe and tell them and influence their thoughts, it'll be much easier to get them to do what you want them to do, right? Which makes sense, right? But it's right there. And so we walk through a few examples here, kind of the Nazis trying to present sort of a wholesome, compassionate image here with a young girl collecting money for a youth shelter. We saw this one that was kind of about pride and strength, right? This young man was fighting for the Fuhrer and for the fatherland, right? And it's very kind of strong and proud and noble. Saw this one, which we seem to have chuckled at a little bit. It's a bit much, right? It's like Kanye. It's a bit much. But yeah, we saw Hitler here portrayed as kind of a messiah, right? Kind of a chosen one, right? Chosen by the gods or by God to lead the people, right? And here he is leading the people with this kind of firm, strong, determined look on his face. Look at his fist, right? He's got the flag, and then he's like, we're gonna do this, right? Determined, right? He's got a determined kind of look, determined fist, and everyone's behind him, right? All of Germany is behind him. And again, that flag has kind of displaced the German flag, right? The Nazis don't serve Germany, they are Germany, right? And again, when the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party or whoever comes to power in Canada, they don't replace the Canadian flag with their own, right? That would be quite a statement, wouldn't it? And I think it's quite a statement here that the German flag has kind of been replaced with the Nazi flag. They are Germany now. I wonder how people felt about that at the time. I'm not sure. It's kind of interesting to think about.
Probably not.
Probably what?
Probably it was happy because Germany was displaced.
Maybe, yeah. And
The government was tough.
yeah. And people certainly supported the Nazis, or large numbers of them did. And again, it's now it's like a symbol of evil. But in terms of like symbols and branding, like it's well done, right? It's a very clear, bold, easily identifiable symbol, right? So in terms of branding, they did a good job. But we looked at this one here, and again, we see this kind of simple, wholesome family, right? That are with their adorable children, and it looks very loving, right? Very tender. And over top of it is the eagle, right? And the eagle, of course, is the Nazi Party. It's no accident that the NSDAP is right beside the eagle's head. Just in case you were unsure about who the eagle is, that's who the eagle is, right? And again, it's fierce, right? It's strong. It's protecting these tender, innocent, vulnerable people. So, let's start a war, right? So, I'm going to let you read a little bit here in a minute, but here's a quick timeline, right? So, we know that in about 1933, Hitler passed the Enabling Act, right? He convinced everybody that, that Germany was in chaos. The communists had attempted to burn down the Parliament building, the Reichstag. I think it was probably the Nazis that did it, but they blamed the communists anyway. And they made him a dictator for 4 years, right? He could rule by decree without the consent of parliament, with no votes or anything. But of course, that was all he needed, right? As soon as he had complete power, he did away with other political parties, closed the Reichstag, arrested political party leaders, fused the office of chancellor and president into Führer, and that's it, right? As soon as he had full control, the democracy was over, right? And so, and yeah, I pointed out to you that, you know, he didn't really seize power, he was given power, right? If people didn't give him that power, he couldn't have taken it, right? But people gladly gave it to him, right? And I think, again, we should remember that, because just because someone is elected doesn't mean they're doesn't mean they're good for democracy or that they like it, right? Some people who get elected are anti-democratic and will destroy your democracy. So anyway, there's that happens, the Enabling Act. There's the Nuremberg Laws, right, that seek to isolate Jewish people from Germans. There's the Kristallnacht that happens kind of at the same time. In 1936, Germany is remilitarizing. They're rebuilding their military. They've actually been practicing military maneuvers in Russia all this time because they weren't able to do it in Germany, and so they were kind of doing it secretly in Russia. They reoccupy the Rhineland. The Rhineland was supposed to be a demilitarized zone as per the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler's going to roll back in there with his military, right? In 1938, he's going to unite with Austria, right? I think he issues some threats to the leaders of Austria. They say, okay, Hitler, we'll do what you want. And he unites Germany and Austria. In 1938, he's going to annex, he's going to take the Sudayton Land. And I don't have a picture, or I don't have a map. Sudayton Land is the western part of Czechoslovakia. It's just a little kind of arrow-shaped or triangle-shaped area. It's got a lot of Germans living in it, even though it's part of Czechoslovakia. Hitler decides he wants it back, takes it, right? No action. In 1939, he occupies the rest of Czechoslovakia, right? So he rolls in with his army and says Czechoslovakia has ceased to exist. Gone, right? Still no response, right? And then finally, Germany invades Poland in 1939, and that's when the Allies will finally be forced to do something, right? Because he's clearly not going to be appeased, right? He's clearly not going to stop. He didn't just want the Rhineland, or just want Austria, or just want Czechoslovakia. Now he's taking Poland, right? And so clearly the appeasement didn't work. He's going to continue to take things, and people are forced to take action, right? So I have a little bit for you to read. If you're at home, the pages are in Microsoft Teams, of course. I'll give you some time. It's not that long of a section, although I said that last time, so you might not want to believe me. But let's do some reading, and then there's some questions on page 138 I would like to discuss, okay? So I'll put some time on the clock here for us, and then I'll let you read. I'll read too. Hey, good morning.
Empty space.
Little bit, hey? Excuse me. Definitely needs more time there. Morning, Ryan. Okay, people, I know that's a lot of reading. How close are you to the end, would you say? Right there?
The whole page,
A whole page? Just a little more?
like a page and a half.
Like a page and a half? Okay. Do you want to take a break and then we'll come back to this? Or do you want to keep reading for a bit and then take a break?
Keep reading.
Keep reading and then break? Okay. Let me put, just going to put a few more minutes on the clock here. Then we'll take a break, okay? Okay, people. Let's just answer the first two questions, then we'll do a break. Okay. So 1939, 1940, of course, is when everything gets kicked off, and the Soviets do something that causes some concern for Western countries. What do they do? Yeah, they invaded Poland, right? And why was this such a concern for Western nations, do you think? It was threatening international stability? Yeah, okay, just give me a little bit more with that. Give me a little bit more. It's the threat, but the question of who is.
It's a small step of Soviet Union, but it's a big step like in what do you call it, political part of the Soviet Union?
The communism?
Party?
The what?
The Communist Party?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the communists. Well, at this point, the communists have been in charge of Russia for, oh gosh, is it 20 years now, give or take? Yeah, it's been about 20 years that the communists have been in charge of Russia at this point, right? But think about the Western nations, right? They're really concerned about Hitler. Hitler's taking over this, he's taking over that. Britain and France are trying to deal with him, but they really don't want to, right? They're hoping he just goes away. And then it looks like, okay, he's going to be a big problem now. He's going to invade Poland. Now we have to go to war. And then out of nowhere comes the Soviet Union invading the other half of Poland, right? And suddenly Britain and France are thinking, oh shoot, now like who's our bigger problem? We thought we had Hitler as a problem. Now the Soviet Union is invading. Now we got two problems when we thought we only had one, right? Yikes, right? Big surprise, maybe a moment of panic, right? Because, yeah, now just when you thought you had one big problem, now you got two, right? So they said that the first part of the war is called the Phony War. Why do they call it this? Or actually, let me ask you another question. What does phony mean? It's a slang term, but we don't really use it anymore. Yeah, exactly. It means fake, right? If something's phony, it's fake. It's not genuine, right? So, yeah, this is a fake war, a phony war. Why was it called a phony war?
Maybe because not everybody was involved.
Kind-
Britain and France didn't care about it.
Not quite. You were almost in the right direction, but then took a wrong turn. Yeah, why is it called the Phony War? Yeah. I think what they say is that at the first part, nothing much is really happening, right? At least not for Britain and France, right? So Poland has been invaded. Poland is gone, right? The Soviets take their half of Poland, and then they move up and they take Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. They try to invade Finland. So that stuff's going on over there. But in terms of the West, Britain and France declare war, but then kind of nothing happens, right? They're threatening Hitler. They're telling him to stop. They're getting their armies ready over here, but really nothing's happening, right? The two sides aren't fighting. And so, yeah, the first part is called the Phony War just because, at least from a Western perspective, no battles are really being fought. There's no engagement. It's just all quiet, right? And again, they mention here in the text that neither the British or the French public really wanted to go to war anyway, right? So the government had declared war. People were like, no, we don't want a war. They were kind of protesting like that. And so nothing's really going on for the first part of like late 1939, early 1940. It's pretty quiet, right? At least at first. Okay, let's take a break. We'll come back and then we'll talk about the fall of France, because unfortunately France is going to be out of it just like that. Embarrassing, but that's what happens. Okay. All right. Okay. We're back. So we said that the Soviets invading Poland. We said the Soviets. Kenny, are you with me? Yeah, so we said the Soviets invading Poland was kind of a surprise and maybe kind of a panicky moment for Britain and France, right? They didn't really want to believe that they were going to have to deal with Hitler in a military way, but they've kind of come to accept that, yes, they do. And then out of nowhere, here come the Soviet Union invading Poland and taking a bunch of the Baltic republics, right? Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And so it's kind of an oh shoot moment, right? Now we've got maybe two enemies. This is a big problem, right? Britain and France declare war on Germany, and of course they need some time to prepare. And so that first period of the war is called the Phony War, because for Britain and France anyway, nothing is really happening, right? But if you're in Poland or Denmark or Finland, things are happening, right? You're trying to defend against a German advance, or it's too late and your country has been overrun, right? So, describe for me the fall of France. How does France get knocked out of this early in 1940? You want to take this one, Kenny?
Germans kind of broke the line by invading the forest sites instead of the front line that France had built.
Yeah.
And after that, in like the days, they drove over like 500 kilometers, and everything is just go down. The front line don't have supplies because Germany is inside the countries already, and with their tanks, without preparations, you just can't stop them.
Yeah.
And yeah, you just get overrun.
Yeah, so there's two things going on here, right? One thing is this German Blitzkrieg. What does that mean, David? Blitzkrieg. Did we talk about that? They mention it very early on page. Yeah. Let me just see if does it define it or not. It doesn't define it in the text here. It shows up on page 116. But yeah, it's really fast. Blitzkrieg is like a German for the lightning war. And so again, with Blitzkrieg, the Germans just roll in really fast with everything, and before you can do anything, they're there and they've won, right? So they move lots and lots of planes and tanks and troops. Everything shows up at once, and before you know it, you're overwhelmed and it's all over, right? What's that? Yeah, so it works really well in Poland, and of course the Germans use it in France as well. And the French have what they call the Maginot Line, and so between France and Germany, they've created this series of like bunkers and shelters and big guns, and they have kind of underground supply systems all set up to repel the Germans should they ever try to attack France. And they set this up years ago, this Maginot Line. And so it's there, but as you probably, I think you know, there was part of that line that they didn't defend. There was kind of a forest there, and they thought, oh, the Germans will never come through the forest, so we won't build any sort of, we won't build any sort of defensive structure there. But of course the Germans drive right through it, and so their multi-million-dollar Maginot Line, the Germans just go around it. And so they go around, they go right for Paris. Like Kenny mentions, it's kind of hard to defend now, because now they're behind your army and they're headed straight for the capital. They roll into Paris. The French are forced to surrender. And that's kind of it, right? It's the battle is kind of over before it begins, and France is out of the war. And so the Germans kind of partition France, right? They create a few different pieces. And so what are the two halves, I guess, of France? How do they divide up France?
We take away North part of it and don't really care about the rest of it.
Yeah, right, here's there. Yeah, so I've got a map here that kind of shows it nicely, right? So the Germans kind of are going to control the north part and the part next to the Atlantic Ocean here, and they're going to leave what's left of the French government to run the bottom part. Why would they choose to divide France in this way? Why would the Germans take control of that part? Strategically speaking.
Well, I mean, it's a part that very close to England, so no matter where they attacks or like how they defend, they have to have control of that part to occupy any kind of strategy.
Right. Yeah, they had two enemies here at the beginning of the war. They had Britain and they had France, right? They've just conquered France. See? Just while you were in the bathroom, they conquered France. That's how quickly it happened. Just like somebody went to the bathroom and France was out. So yeah, the only enemy they have in the war right now is Britain, right? So of course they don't want to leave this section to the French government, right? The French government will probably like leave the back door open and let the British come in, right? So here, the Germans are going to occupy this to make sure that there's a strong boundary keeping the British out, right? You don't want the French here, they'll just let the British in. So the French are kind of in charge down here, but as you probably read about, the French government down here is basically doing whatever the Germans tell them to do, right?
They didn't take over Italy.
Who didn't?
Germany.
No, because the Germans are allied with Italy.
Oh.
Germans are allied with Italy. So remember, there's a fascist government there under Mussolini. Mussolini and Hitler are buddies. They're BFFs, right? They're friends on Facebook. They follow each other on Instagram. You know what I'm going for. They're friends, and so yeah, they're not really worried about. The Germans aren't worried about Italy here. They are worried about Britain.
Well, anyway, Italy is just doing nothing.
They're doing nothing?
The whole war, like, it's not important at all.
No, it's not.
Like, yeah, just eating pizza at their homes and using spaghetti to fight, I guess. Like, none of the war is about them.
Not really. Not really. They're a bit of a distraction, really.
You can
is-
join both sides. At both sides, they're just useless.
Yep. Yeah, they'll start off with the Germans, then they'll join the Allies later on, and yeah, that's a whole thing.
So, when did slaves begin?
When did who?
Slaves.
Slaves?
Yeah.
What-
Slave trade.
When did it end?
Yeah. Like them taking over parts of Africa.
Well, in most of the Western world, slavery is outlawed in about the mid to late 1800s. So it's pretty much over by then. By this time, it's definitely over. Yeah, it's definitely over this time. Right. So the Nazis kind of divide divide France into two pieces. The French government is kind of controlling this area, but again, they're doing what the Germans want them to do, right? And so you read about in the text how the Germans have captured, I think, 2 million French soldiers, which they might give back if the British or if the French government does what they want them to do, including round up a bunch of Jewish people, right, and send them into Germany. And you can only imagine what's going to happen to them there. So the French government is kind of in league with the Germans, or at least they're doing what the Germans say because they don't really have a choice at this point, right? The French are also paying reparations to the Germans. Oof. A little bit of revenge there, I guess, right? Millions and millions of French dollars going to the Germans now. A little bit of revenge. Yeah, and so the next part they talk about is, of course, the Battle of Britain. And so think about it for a moment, because this is kind of a scary, like Hitler's kind of almost won, right? He's made an agreement with Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union they have a non-aggression pact. So Stalin isn't an enemy, the USSR isn't an enemy. He's knocked out or taken over all of Central Europe. He's conquered France. Britain is really the only country standing in their way, right? If the Nazis can defeat Britain, it's over, right? They've succeeded, right? And so what's the Battle of Britain? It's not just one battle, but what is it?
Air Force and Navies.
Okay.
Do you know the name of the battle happened?
Maybe not. Maybe not. What's the Battle of Britain? Not so much the Navy, but it's the Air Force.
Washington DC is just to cut like the Spitfire.
What about the Spitfires?
Just to cut like the Spitfire. Basically, the Germans started just using the bombers to destroy multiple military bases and where the British government's protesters armies years, like fighters, battleships, guns, heavy machine guns, warship.
Yeah.
They just going to bomb it because, as you know, Germans don't have a great navy. They
Yeah.
only have like 3 battleships and multiple destroyers and tons of U-boats. It doesn't do much on in the sea fight. So
Yeah, exactly, right? So the problem for Germany, of course, is that England is an island, right? And the Germans can't really get across from here because England controls all of this, right? England's got a great navy. They've had a great navy for 100 years, right? And they control all of this. And so the Germans can't really get across because the British will blow them up. And the Germans don't really have the watercraft to transport their troops across anyway, right? So there's this plan, this Operation Sea Lion, right, to invade Britain and conquer London. But it's kind of a fantasy, right? Because the Germans just don't have control of the English Channel, and they just can't get across, right? They're sort of stuck. And so instead, they start flying bombing runs to London. And their idea is they're just going to bomb the crap out of London. Eventually, the people of London will say, no, we surrender, stop bombing us incessantly, right? And
But then destroy people's lives, right?
yes, well, yeah, because people are being killed, right? And so these bombers are kind of flying in. The British send out their fighter planes, their little Spitfires, to try and shoot down the bombers before they get to London. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not, right? But the British kind of try to defend their city and their island as best they can while being kind of frequently bombed by the German Air Force, right, by the Luftwaffe. And I want to show you this because this is actually, you've seen this before, right? It's kind of a meme now, effectively, right? It's keep calm and, drink green tea or whatever. There's a million of them, right? But this actually kind of comes from the period. It comes from the Battle of Britain when the Nazis were bombing, every couple days they were bombing London, and the government was kind of asking people to do this, right? Keep calm and carry on, right? So try not to freak out about it. When you hear the air raid siren going off, get into your basement, get below ground, and stay put. But otherwise, try to carry on with your life, right? Continue to do normal things and try not to freak out too much, right? And so this kind of comes from the period, right, when the British were being, incessantly bombed by the Nazis in order to get Britain to surrender, right? Hitler don't have my map. Hitler couldn't invade Britain, so he was going to try and get them to surrender by bombing the city, right?
Is it true that the British government told the people to switch off their lights at night in the house so that the bombers can't see them?
To turn off their lights?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably good strategy, right? Because these bombs are. Have you ever seen how these bombers work? Like
Yeah.
how you drop the bombs out of them?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's all visual, right?
Yeah. At that time.
At that time. Yeah, if you've ever seen it in movies, it's kind of cool, but they have a guy in the bottom of the bomber in this sort of glass bubble, and he's looking down almost like through binoculars, right? And so he has to press the button when he thinks they're nearly over a target, right? So if you shut all the lights off, it's much harder for him to find where he should drop his bomb, right? So I think that's probably true, because yeah, like the targeting of bombs is not, it's not electronic or whatever. It's visual. There's some guy looking through a pair of binoculars, waiting to press the button at the right spot, right? So I think that's probably true. Does it work? Do the British surrender? No, they don't, right? And in fact, not only do they not surrender, they come out of it with kind of a stronger will to fight, right? So before the Battle of Britain, the British public is kind of like, ugh, like we don't want another war, peace, right? Talk to this Hitler guy, make peace with him, right? We don't want to go to war, we don't want to fight, we don't want to have millions of our young men die again. Just talk it out with this guy, right? But after the Battle of Britain, Hitler bombs London for months. Finally, he gives up because it's not working. The British aren't surrendering. And when they come out of it, they're like, okay, now we're going to finish this thing, right? We didn't want to fight with you, but now you're in trouble, right? So it kind of has the opposite effect of what Hitler wants, right? He wants to punish the British so that finally they'll surrender just so the bombing stops. But instead, he's forced to give up, and the British are like, okay, now we're going to kick some, what, right? some Nazi butt. The last thing I'll talk about is what brings the war becomes really global when the Soviet Union and when the US enter the war. And so what brings the Soviet Union into the war?
Because those broke the agreement and stopped war with the Soviet Union for no reason.
Right. So Hitler decided he was going to attack the Soviet Union, right? Even though he had a non-aggression pact, he violated it. Big surprise. Right. We didn't talk about this earlier, but when Hitler took the Sudayton Land from Czechoslovakia, he made a peace treaty with Britain and France, saying, "Okay, I won't take any more." Right, and so they signed a peace treaty. Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of Britain, said, "It's peace in our time." Right, and everyone patted themselves on the back and went home. And then Hitler turned around and took the rest of Czechoslovakia. So he signed the treaty, and then he was like, whatever, I'm going to do what I want, right? So same thing here. He signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, and then turned around and said, haha, I'm going to do whatever I want, and attacked them, right? And so that brings the Soviet Union into the war, of course. But how does the U.S. get pulled into the war?
I think it's people attacking United States ship for like transporting things to Britain. Like
That's definitely
no more ship. It's like normal trawlers or something. I don't remember.
That's definitely part of it. So you're referring to this. I think you're referring to the sinking of the Lusitania, and Lusitania is a passenger ship in the Atlantic that gets sunk by a German U-boat, and so hundreds of just innocent vacationers die in the Lusitania. So that annoys the Americans. But then there's a bigger thing that brings them in eventually. Doesn't have to do with Germany, though.
Nuclear stuff?
Nope, no nuclear stuff yet. Has to do with Pearl Harbor. Right?
Ah,
Yeah. So that's what brings the Americans in. The Japanese, who are allied with Germany, they attack Pearl Harbor's the U.S. Navy base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. So the one morning, the Japanese planes come out of nowhere, bomb the heck out of Pearl Harbor Naval Base, and then disappear, right? And again, that, I think in combination with the sinking of Lusitania, the Americans are like, all right, we didn't want to be involved in this thing. This was a European conflict. We were going to leave it to Europe to solve it, but now we're in, baby, right? And they're in. And then we have kind of a truly kind of global conflict. As you read about, there's fighting happening everywhere, right? There's little battles being waged all over the place. And yeah, now we have a full-scale conflict, right? Okay. I think that's kind of as far as I want to go for today, because it's Friday, and we don't want to strain ourselves, right? Any questions or anything people want to ask?
Was Canada part of the war?
Absolutely. Canada was, by the time we get to this part of the war, or this period of history, Canada's a little more independent from Britain than we used to be. So World War I, when Britain declared war, Canada was just in it, because we were very closely attached to them. At this time, we had more independence, and so we declared war on Germany, but we kind of waited a week, just to sort of, prove it was our decision. But we debated it in the House of Commons in Ottawa. There was a vote. The vote passed, and then so Canada declares war, maybe like September 10th or something, a week after Britain, and we're in there as well. As you'll probably read about on Monday, the Canadians have a pretty big role to play in when the Allies come back into Europe. So the whole like Normandy, D-Day, storming of the beach thing, if you've seen Saving Private Ryan or anything like that.
Like Canada is a big part of the Second World War, but just no one mentioned it at all.
Well, I don't know. Well, we mention it here.
Yeah, only Canada.
Yeah, but we do have a big role to play in kind of the turning of the tide, right? And all of those, all of those pilots that are getting lost, you said? Canadians have a big role to play there too, because a lot of Canadians join the Royal Air Force. And here in Canada, we train a lot of pilots for the Second World War. And we train a lot of aircraft mechanics. And actually where I'm from in Edmonton, during the Second World War, there used to be kind of an air base in the middle of Edmonton that was kind of a stopover point, and so planes would come to Edmonton, repairs and refuel, and then we'd send them to the Soviet Union, because we were working with the Soviet Union at that point. And apparently it was so busy that a plane was either taking off or landing every 3 minutes during the war. So Canada put a lot of soldiers into the war, but we also served. We had a role as like a aviation training, and so lots of pilots and mechanics were trained here. They were also building ships, actually, just in the inlet there. There was one or two ship makers that was building, I think, warships for World War II. So, yeah, there was, Canada had a big role to play. Maybe people don't talk about it outside of Canada, but we're there in France when the Allies come back into France. The Canadians are there. We have a really strong presence as the Germans get pushed back into Germany. We have Canadians are the ones who have a big role in liberating Belgium and the Netherlands, and so I think there's actually monuments to Canadian soldiers in Belgium and Netherlands, because we were the ones who kind of liberated them from the Nazis. So we do have a presence for sure. We're not the most important thing, but we're there. We're definitely there. Okay, that's all. Pack it up. Have a good weekend. I will see you Monday. Can we do a quiz on Thursday? Can we do that? I know we're having one in social justice. Can we do it in history as well? Because Wednesday is a day off for us, right? For you. Wednesday's a day off. You have no school on Wednesday. Yeah.
PT? What
Huh?
happened again, Wednesday?
It's a professional development day for teachers.
Oh, yeah, PT day.
So you're off. Quiz on Thursday?
Yeah, I'm fine.
You're fine? Everybody good?
Well, class.
Okay. All right, let's do it. Let's do Thursday. I'll put it Microsoft Teams. I'll make it official. And we'll do it.
Bye.
Okay. See you, Kenny. Okay, see you guys. Have a good weekend.